There's still
Thank you,
hopeful.
everyone, for coming. I'm sure we're going to have a very comprehensive discussion today. We have three brilliant guests who can give us their vantage point on the 2024 election. We have Michael Dimick, the president of Pew Research Center, Frank Luntz, veteran pollster and communications strategist, and Ashley Parker, the senior national correspondent for the Washington Post. So, guys, I just want to start with where we're at in the trail. We have a couple unconventional stops this weekend. So I just want to talk about their closing strategy. And Ashley, I thought we could start with you on Kamala Harris. She's had a very condensed campaign. Her time is precious. Messaging has to be very deliberate. How has her team decided to close their message to voters in the final days of the campaign, and as some people are already casting their ballots?
So they have a couple messages they want to get out to voters. They probably have 5, which you could do in an 18-month campaign. In a, post-bad debate campaign, they're kind of doubling down on 3 core messages. One is reproductive rights. You're going to see her hit that harder. And it's interesting, there's some debate in the Democratic Party in her orbit of if this election should have just been, when you go back and you look at 2022 and every special election, if the argument for Democrats should have been to make this a referendum on a post-Dobbs world, but they're not. That's one of their messages. Another one is obviously the economy, trying to win the message of that she cares about the economy, that the economy is getting better. That's 2. And then the third one, and they will say there's a very nuanced distinction, which is if Biden had been the candidate, and this is how he started his campaign, he would have very clearly closed on democracy, on threats to democracy. And that's sort of what her team is doing. She has this big rally on the Ellipse on Tuesday, but they say it's slightly different. It's not democracy, it's more danger, making the argument that Trump would be, a second Trump term would be more dangerous. And so those are kind of the 3 closing messages.
And what about Trump? Has he changed his message in the final sprint, or are we still hearing a lot of the same messaging we've gotten from him in the last?
Yes, Arnold Palmer was pure strategic. I mean, Trump's, what Trump tested that tests quite well is this trans ad against Kamala Harris, where he says. It shows her talking about how she supports tax dollars going to prisoners to undergo gender-affirming surgery, and then the tagline is a sort of brutal, Kamala Harris, she's for they, them, not you. And it's interesting because and Frank does focus groups so he can weigh in, but voters will say they don't, even many liberal voters, Democratic voters will say, they don't really like that policy. It kind of makes them uncomfortable, but that's not what they're going to vote on, right? That's not related to their lives. But the reason that the Trump campaign and some Democrats believe it's so devastating is because it gets at this idea that she is dangerously liberal, and it taps into all of the young voters. The election, right, will be decided by young voters, brown voters, black voters, especially young, although that sometimes is described as under 50, so do with that what you will. I'm a young voter.
It's all subjective.
But it also, again, taps into sort of like a wokeness, right? Mm-hmm. And it appeals to an people who don't like the reactionary wokeness on the left. That's what it taps into more than someone being like, I'm going to vote against her because of something that will affect a very small number of prisoners. Mm-hmm.
And Frank, can you tell us about, you do these focus groups, how are these messages being received? Like, how is any of this breaking through to voters? And I know you recently said, one thing that Ashley mentioned, you had recently said that her turn to focus on this sort of anti-Trump rhetoric, this, he's the threat, has changed the momentum behind her campaign. I mean, what are you hearing?
So I'm trying to figure out how to begin this. I haven't been here in a couple of years, and I'm grateful for the invitation. And I know that what I'm about to say may cost me ever being invited back. So you either say that this whole election is a shit show, or you say we're fucked. So I don't know which one is more appropriate. I was suggesting in the green room that we're totally fucked, and they said, no, the word totally is too much. And that's the best I can do at an attempt at humor, because it's not funny. I'm not afraid of what happens 10 days from now. I'm afraid of what happens the 10 days after 10 days from now. And I've never felt this way before. I thought January 6th was impossible. And now I'm thinking, how can they make it even worse? And it's already starting. Trump is uncontrollable. And it's not going to change. He's going to do whatever he's going to do. His own staff cannot control him. They do every kind of guardrail. By the way, I'm taking notes. I'm not returning texts. I want to be clear. You can. I will hand my phone to you when we're done, and you can look at it. Just don't do anything with the pictures. Although, actually, I'm sure the Chinese have my phone already, so it doesn't matter. I want to do Harris first. She could have come out at CNN and said, Anderson, with all due respect, I'm not going to answer a specific question. The public has a right to know where I stand, what I'm going to do, not my goals, not my objectives or my priorities, but exactly what I'm going to do the first hour, the first day, the first week, the first month, and the first year. And this is going to take a few minutes. So we're at a town hall. I'm going to answer your questions right now. And she goes on, and she talks about each of those. She would probably get to the first month, and Anderson will say, I need to ask you questions. And she puts her hand up to him and says, no. They have a right to know what I'm going to do, and I have the responsibility to tell them. She looks at the audience and says, will you give me permission to go on for 3 more? Is it okay that I go on for 3 or 4 minutes? And in that effort, she will have changed the narrative that she says what people want to hear rather than what she believes. She will have changed the narrative into someone who's going to get things done. It is so easy. But she so wants to go with Trump, as I'm sure some of you here do. We know who Donald Trump is. We know what he said. We know what he's done. It's all done. Trump is done. Good and bad. She's not. And this is the way to make a change. And I don't get why, when they asked her about the wall, she goes right into Trump. First word. And then she does it in the second sentence. We know where he stands on the wall. She needs to tell where she stands. And I'm going to do something that's going to bother a few of you in the ear. I'm seeing vestiges of Hillary Clinton in 2016. Hillary Clinton she hated Trump so much that she couldn't get off of him. And on election day, she won, which he hates to hear. But you didn't win the Electoral College, which is what really matters. So we're doing the same thing all over again. Mark my words, on election night, you're going to call me and say, what the hell? You're not actually going to say what the fuck, but you're going to say, what the hell? And children, you cannot watch this video, or you're going to have to edit this out. As far as Trump's concerned, it's simple. Here's $10 million, go to the Cayman Islands and shut the hell up for the next 10 days. His staff is letting him go to Madison Square Garden. Are they nuts? What's he going to do there? He's going to go full Trump. He's going to love the audience. He's going to take it all in, and he's going to say something that gets him defeated. So I don't understand. I'm spitting as I'm telling you this. I'm sorry. I will get you a wipe when we're done with this. And I swear to God, I do not have COVID. Well, I did have COVID this morning, so good luck. But they should have actually gotten him away from there, because he can still cost himself the election.
I would just add very briefly, that makes me think of something. I was covering Trump in 2016, and one of his top advisors said to me, because it was the same, it was a different challenge, but it was the same thing. It was, can they get him for that for 11 days, right, to be un-Trumpy, right? To like get people to plausibly think like, when he gets to the Oval Office, he'll become presidential. And I remember an aide told me that they printed out like a cartoon of, I may be getting the characters wrong, but it was like Roadrunner chasing, or Wile E. Coyote chasing Roadrunner off of a cliff. And they were like, you can do this. You can chase Hillary Clinton off of that cliff, but look where Roadrunner ends up, right? Or Wiley, I forget who chases who.
Wiley Cody ends up.
Yeah, but like they both end up looking down and realizing, oh my goodness, right? There's just air under my feet. And in 2016, that was enough. Like he internalized that and he was sort of calm-ish for like the necessary, 5 to 9 days.
Here's the problem. I was in the White House on I should not acknowledge this because there's a camera somewhere in here. I was in the White House December 23rd, 2020. It was the White House Christmas party. I should not have been, I'm Jewish, so I should not be at a Christmas party in the White House. By the way, is anyone here Jewish? Raise your hands. Don't raise your hands. Have you not learned anything about history? Every time someone from the stage has asked that question, it hasn't worked out for us. I'm in the White House. And I finally get the guts, because he's difficult, to go up and ask him, what does the J in Donald J. Trump stand for? You know what he told me? Genius. I'm done. Can I leave now?
Yeah, please. No, there's a lot there, a lot to unpack about both campaign strategy. But Michael, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. This election, we've had a few very historic and tumultuous moments, with Biden dropping out, a couple assassination attempts. But I think the one thing is that nothing has really fundamentally moved the needle when it comes to this race. The candidates remain in a dead heat. We saw some polling today, new polling today from New York Times Siena poll, which has them both tied, locked, 48-48 for popular vote. I wonder if you can just talk about what's changed over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of just the deeply entrenched partisan attitudes and how that factors into where we are in this moment.
Yeah. No, it's stunning, isn't it? I mean, to watch an election season that's had as many enormous turning points in it, and yet every time we look for those post-turning point polls, it just hasn't really shifted in a significant way. I mean, that does tell you that there's a big chunk of America that's pretty locked in, and maybe that's not a surprise. To your point, Trump is the dominant figure in the American political conversation, and there's not a lot to learn about him for most people. They know where they are, and they know which side they're on. You thought maybe the shift on the Democratic side would shift that dynamic. Oh, people are going to learn about Kamala Harris. That could move things. But I think I'm agreeing with you, Frank. It's all a conversation around how that compares to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is the bigger figure in that equation in terms of how people are thinking about this. But it's all part of this longer term sort of trend of polarization in America, which is no surprise to anyone. But that dynamic has certainly just continued to amplify. I remember at Pew Research Center, the first time we were doing really big studies on polarization in like the late 90s and 2000, we thought we were seeing sort of the extremes of this political dialogue and how could things get any worse? And, there are no independents left in the American electorate, oh my gosh, and that is obviously sort of quaint by today's standards, And one thing we've been seeing is that it really is an American phenomenon in some ways. That's not to say that these trends aren't happening in other parts of the world. And for those of you who follow the world, right, there's a lot of polarization going in a lot of countries. But the way that almost every issue in America is falling into this same left-right divide, the way that there isn't a dynamic or shift. Some of it's just the fundamentals of the American electoral system, right? It's so rigid that everything just gets sort of locked into this winner-take-all structure. Some of it may be in the technology and media environment that amplifies it in ways that maybe are less so in other countries. But this is a very deep American divide, and not only do you see it like in comparisons to other countries, but you see it in the American self-awareness. We asked a question around the world about how deep do you think divides in your country are over this and this and this, religion and race or ethnicity in your country or partisanship. And I mean, in America, we're fixated on this, right? It's become our identity. It's become our entire national conversation. We're so panicked about it, yet we're so frozen in it, right? All at the same time. And I think that goes a little bit to, boy, with all the things that have changed over the past 7 months, there was very little dynamic in the kind of fundamental underpinnings of this.
And Frank, I wonder if you could
You're
weigh
coming
in.
back to me? Didn't you shut her up at this point?
Well, I just think in this election, there's all this talk, as it is in every election, but just this about undecided voters and where they fit in this, particularly because we see people like this partisan entrenchment, right? Where are they at this point? Are there still undecided voters, and what is going to drive them to come out?
How many of you in this room are undecided? Raise your hand. I'm not going to kill you. I just realized.
Don't raise your hand.
How many of you are undecided here? Anybody? Not a single person raises their hand. It's almost nobody. And it's more male than female. It's younger than older. The problem with Trump is that he reminds women of their first husband's divorce lawyer. And so women look at him and say, they made up their minds. If they like him, it's because they like a straight shooter, they like someone who's going to break up the system. They still want to drain the swamp. And it tends to be older women. I think the biggest undecided population are women 18 to 29 who have to decide whether or not they vote. Which is why I don't understand why they're bringing Bruce Springsteen along in this, because women 18 to 29 don't know who he is. It should be Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I'm saying that at a CFR event. But Taylor Swift matters to 18 to 29-year-old women. And if she wants to make a difference, I know she hates Trump. You go on the road, you do 2 or 3 concerts, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Taylor Swift can move this election. She really can. We did a survey on this. By the way, it makes me cough too. We asked, who do you trust more? This is when Biden was still in the race. Who has a greater influence on you? And Trump at 38%, Biden at 35%, and Swift at 24%. 24% said she influences them more in politics than the other two. Now, one of the reasons for that is that Joe Biden is so old, it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes. I'm going to see when you actually start to get angry with me. His favorite painting is The Last Supper. He's actually... Let me finish the joke first. He's in the painting. He calls himself a constitutionalist. It's because he was in the room when they wrote the document. Younger women, if they participate, can swing this election because they exist in every state. I don't know what they're going to do. And I know that abortion rights is their #1 issue, more than prices and more than immigration, and that's the only group that prioritizes in first place abortion rights. Harris is doubling down on younger voters. I don't know if that's the right strategy, because in the end, it doesn't work with men, even fathers with daughters, husbands with wives. And if you don't answer the question of immigration or prices, I don't know if the abortion rights issue gets you to where she wants to go. And as far as undecided, they're not voting. I've been doing this for the New York Times. It's the best series. Sorry, I just realized, what the hell am I doing? She's the Washington Post, and I'm mentioning the New York Times.
That's true, but my husband works for the New York Times.
Excellent. So the New York Times has got this great series.
So we'll accept it.
And it's on younger voters. But the undecided, I don't believe votes, or I believe votes third party, spoils their ballot, does something. It's the persuadables, and they're still there. And I just don't believe that abortion rights gets you the persuadable vote, that they've already made their decision. The persuadable vote cares about prices, affordability, and safety.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next point, which I was hoping the two of you guys could talk about. But it seemed that Harris had been focused on independents, disaffected Republicans in these final days. Is that the best use of her time? I mean, she, obviously has really emphasized or is emphasizing the message about Trump, as a threat to democracy. You talked to her advisors, they say we want voters to visualize a second Trump term. There's a concern that there's Trump amnesia, according to her campaign. And so they've really tried to focus on these Republicans who may otherwise stay home if they're not going to vote for Trump. I mean, is that addressing the persuadable people in this election?
I mean, I do so I think Trump amnesia is a real thing. Even, I have covered Trump since basically 2 days after poor, sad, sweet Jeb Bush dropped out in February of 2015. First for the New York Times, then for the Washington Post. And even I, sometimes I'll look up an old story to try to remember an expert I want to call or what. And even I am paid to steep myself in Trump. And even I'm like, wait, he did what? I wrote what? What happened then? It is just, I think Trump amnesia is real. But at this point, they need to do more than, as Frank said, there's a belief that Trump is sort of baked in the cake. And frankly, the cake was baked when you showed up to vote for him in 2016. Sort of fundamentally who he is, whether you love him, whether you hate him, you knew that when you went to the polls on Election Day in 2016, which is why character attacks on him are so difficult, right? The idea that a 27th woman coming out is going to, she's going to be the, it just does, either that bothers you or it doesn't bother you, or it bothers you and you're going to hold your nose and vote for him, or it bothers you and you're going to rally all your friends to not vote for him, but it's just known. So what their belief is, again, that sort of in pushing it forward, it's not the remember, when he called, remember when he said this offensive thing, or remember when he did that. It's that they have to move it forward to, he will be dangerous, right? He has said he wants to be a dictator on day one. He will take, he will move us towards an autocracy. He will, he has said he wants to weaponize the Justice Department, and that his candidacy, his presidency will be about grievance and retribution. And I don't know the answer, if that will be a successful closing pitch or not, but there is an understanding that you can't just be remember how chaotic 2016 to 2020 was. You have to push it forward in some sort of way, because there's a lot of voters, because Frank was saying they care about the economy, they care about prices, maybe they care about safety and immigration, and they don't like Trump as a human. They don't like his behavior. They don't like how he acts. They don't like what he says. He's off Twitter now, but they didn't like having to come down to the breakfast table and explain new words and phrases to their 9-year-old daughter every morning. They don't like any of that, but they liked a lot of the policies. Those 4 years he was president felt good. And there's the concern and the risk that they go into the voting booth and just hold their nose and I'm voting my 401k. And so there's a thought that if you can push it forward to the danger that may be compelling. That is the theory of the case. I don't know if it will be successful.
Let me give you 3 numbers to remember. And this was done in the week before Biden dropped out. So he's still presidential candidate. They asked the public who was more successful. Was the administration successful, Trump and Biden? 55% said Trump was successful. 39% said Joe Biden. When I got those numbers back, I should not admit this. I yelled at my office saying you transposed the columns. This is wrong. They didn't. I was an idiot. This is what it is. The public really thinks that Donald Trump had a successful administration, and they believe that Joe Biden, for all the things that he did, all the legislation that passed, his communication was horrible. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is on the issue of affordability. Do not let anyone say it's the economy, because it's not. It's not jobs. It's not wages. It's not economic insecurity. It's the fact that wages went up. They're going up. But prices are going up even more, or at least they did for a couple of years. So that affordability, Trump has a 10-point advantage over Harris, despite the programs that she's put out. And he has a 12-point advantage on immigration. She still can't answer, she won't answer that the last 4 years have not been successful on immigration. And if she won't come clean on that, then voters start to doubt her authenticity. And I use that word explicitly because that's the word that I get in the focus groups. She's not authentic. Trump is scary. Actually, that's not what they say. They say, I don't like what he says. Exactly what you said and the words you used, but at least he's authentic. So I want you to ponder this. They trust Trump more than they trust She's more trustworthy, but they trust what Trump says more than they trust her. And this is now an alternative universe. We're now 10 days away. This is what's going to have an impact on Election Day.
Yeah. I was going to build on what you said about prices, and I agree, you shouldn't think of it just as the economy. It is specific to sort of inflation and prices. But even there, I think a lot of folks and a lot of coverage even misses what I suspect is really fundamental for a lot of the folks who are in that camp, which is, yes, it's about the price of, the gallon of milk at the grocery store or those other transactional things. Those are visible. Those carry an outsized weight in people's minds. But I think the price surges in the last 3 years were just on top of this larger sense that for many Americans, the fundamentals of the American dream aren't available, right? I will never in my lifetime be able to afford to buy a house. So many Americans feel that way, right? I will never be able to afford to send my children to school. For a lot of us, probably a lot of us in this room, those are worries, right? But they're not nevers, right? I will never be able to have security in my retirement. I may not even be able to retire. I am this close with one healthcare incident to my entire family being shut down, right? That's how lots and lots of Americans feel. And that class divide in America, and I use that word with intent, because America, for most of its history, politically, or at least modern history, was sort of unique among major democracies in not having its political array fundamentally driven by class. That's why the polls got 2016 wrong, right? Education had never mattered in American elections. Why would we wait a poll to education, right? Well, by 2016, it really mattered, right? And now it matters more. And there's just a huge swath of people for which it's not, I guess my point is, it's not just the consumer price inflation that's been the focus of a lot of our attention. That's big, it's important, but that was just on top of this enormous sense of just, nothing works. Nothing will work for me. The entire system is rigged, right? I have no way of getting to anywhere near the American dream, so why not, right? Why not choose something like this?
This would be a great conference for you. Saving the American dream. Mm-hmm. Because you have Democrats and Republicans, you got young and old, you got foreign policy experts and economic experts. Because we can tell you how bad it is, but in the end, we don't do any good unless we give you solutions, unless we help you all find the results. And I don't see that, because too often I'm complaining about it, and I'm not sufficiently focused on how do we fix this. By the way, in terms of class, I don't call it middle class. I don't call it working class. And the worst of all is blue collar. Mm-hmm. What the hell is blue collar? Mm-hmm. They don't dress that way. People live paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
A quarter of Americans, almost a quarter, live every week, every month, paycheck to paycheck. They wonder if they're going to be able to pay their bills. What do these candidates have for them? And can they actually make it happen? Mm-hmm. I'm not hearing an answer. Trump comes closer to it. By the way, drink that wine, because you're going to need a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Just because I know we're on TV here, CFR, I don't realize you guys are all drunks. What are you, and it's not for us, it's for them. What are you going to do for them to make their life just a little bit easier? And that does not involve yelling and screaming at Donald Trump. It does involve listening and learning and speaking their language. I got screamed at, but in a fun way, at JFK. It was actually not, it was actually really cool. By a couple African American men, which is what woke me up to this, because they came over to me and says, "You're wrong. She's not going to win." I thought for sure that Donald Trump was going to lose this election because of his debate performance. Talking about eating dogs and cats is not a good message, usually, to the public. It's a better line than you give it credit for. And they said to me, "You don't get it. You don't understand. He hears us. The same people who hate him hate us. The same people who've been going after him have been going after us." And I'm looking at them, and I know their race, and I know their age, and I'm dumbfounded, because I'm not expecting it. And they say, all their friends are doing this. All their friends are talking about it. Finally, we're going to put someone in the White House who understands and gets us. We're victims just as he is. Go ahead.
I was just gonna, what Frank was saying makes me think of, this was before Donald Trump was on the scene as a political figure, but in 2014, my editor sent me out to do sort of a voter voices where you talk to a ton of voters around the 2014 midterms, like drive the old Route 60. So I drove it, I flew back from Indianapolis, and I probably talked to like 200 voters. And the one thing that came away was like a lot of these people were incredibly patriotic. I'd go to these houses and they were maybe a little, needed some upkeep, right? Like they were crumbling in some cases, but they were all bits and pieces of Americana, right? There were American flags or flower pots, painted with the American flag. So sort of people, like patriotic people. And the thing they all said was like, I did everything right. Like I did what they told me. I put money away for my 401k. I got a good job. I showed up and I worked from 9 to 5. I bought a house that the bank told me I could afford, right? That was a good investment. And like, look at my block, right? Every single, 5 of these 10 houses on my block have been foreclosed upon, right? Like, and same thing, like now I will not be able to retire. There was also a sense of, as you mentioned, of victimization, right? Like they might have been collecting unemployment or medical comp, but that was very justified because they had a real injury, but their neighbor across the street was collecting it and didn't deserve it. And they were basically like, and those clowns in Washington, in New York, like ruined the country, and not a single one of them has paid a price. And they did not have the language then, but what they were saying was like, drain the swamp and burn it all down. And so, because there's also this question is like, did Trump create, like, and I think Trump sort of harnessed something that already existed in the country, and we just sort of, and he recognized it in a way that other people didn't. But I think back to that road trip frequently as sort of like, we could have predicted the rise of Trump in certain ways. It wasn't like as gobsmacking as a number of people believe it to be.
And one of the challenges, and this is not you, and this is not your newspaper.
Maybe me.
No, it's not you. And it's not my theory. I do not like doing this. But I watch some of the television coverage. And what they do is the show comes on, and if you thought you hadn't seen everything from Donald Trump, watch what's coming next.
Right.
The reporter or the host demonizes him before you even hear him. And that is exactly backwards, and that creates the problem. There was no way to hold him accountable when the person speaking seemed biased or seemed one-sided. You have to let these people be who they are, and then you make the judgment from there. They did it in the wrong order, and so Trump's unhinged press conferences, they thought he was a victim of the people yelling at him because of the person who began the discussion by saying Donald Trump took rudeness to a new level. They were angrier at the reporters and at the media than they were at him. Those who tried to hold him accountable have completely failed because they've done it wrong.
It makes him more authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you guys are kind of talking about, which I think kind of gets to this, is that, both are trying to run as a change candidate when they've both been in office, right? And so, polling told us over the last year or longer that people wanted a different candidate than Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And they got one, right, in Kamala Harris. But her mandate when she took the helm was to distinguish herself, to define herself, right? Voters wanted to hear more about who she is, what she stands for, and how she would be different from a Joe Biden administration. Has that been accomplished over the last few months? Has she been able to do that? Do voters, Michael, feel free to weigh in, do voters feel like, she, that those questions have been answered?
Probably not, no. I don't know that she's, it's hard to distinguish yourself from the administration you're in, as much as she's tried to say, I am the candidate of change. We're not going back, meaning back to Trump as an incumbent, sort of trying to run as if it's 2020 rather than 2024. it's very hard to disown those policies. I think she believes in those policies. I think, and if you believe them, those policies will work for the Americans I just described, but not in the next 2 weeks. They're not going to work for those voters. It's a longer, game plan, and that's the pinch that she's in. And I don't know that she's willing to sort of disown, a set of policies.
She hasn't.
Yeah.
She was down, 5 points when she first got in?
Yeah.
Then it's 4, then it's 3, then it's 2, then it's 1, then it's dead even. Then she's up 1, she's up 2, she's up 3. She peaked at about 3.5. And what did that entire period have? Joy.
Right.
What do you remember about her? She was dancing on stage. People at her rallies were dancing as well. Yeah, the Republicans made fun of it, but it was positive and it was future focused, and there was emotion and passion and something that we haven't seen in a long, long time. People who were happy. And then she got dark. She let Trump determine the tone and the demeanor of the campaign. She went at him because her people said exactly what you said, which is that too many voters had forgotten Trump's behavior, had forgotten the things that Trump had done, and did not fully understand the threat. And so she tried to be Donald Trump, and nobody can be Donald Trump. And she's come back. Now, she's fallen. They're dead even now. By the way, as a pollster, I would tell you I don't trust the numbers. I'm not making bets because I don't know what the turnout's going to be. I still don't know. And people call me all the time and say, how should I bet? I'm not answering that question. I do tell them where they can get marijuana, for the record. So I figure, by the way, I think it's really smart that the Democrats put marijuana legalization on so many state ballots. The problem is the voters are usually asleep or they forget, so it doesn't actually work. She had the answer, and then she went Trump. And that's been, I think, a fundamental and potentially fatal mistake.
Although there was also an argument, and you guys as pollsters would know better, but that some of that initial bounce had nothing to do with her. It was this collective sigh of relief from Democrats, and she was getting back up to the levels that Biden should have been at as like a baseline Democratic candidate, right? So like her gains were not actual gains. They were like gains getting her back to like the bare minimum to possibly be competitive with Trump.
She was ahead.
I mean, the ahead might have to do with your theory, but the part of the catching up was just like no longer hemorrhaging the groups that Biden should have never been hemorrhaging in the first place.
One thing I do want to address, because this is CFR, is how much foreign policy has factored into this. Which, obviously at different points, we've had some flashpoints with Ukraine, with Gaza. But now, how much can this affect voters, especially in states like Michigan, where a few 100,000 votes matter in this election, and which way the state's going to go? So, I'll let you guys talk, but how much are we seeing foreign policy, and even Michael, just compared to previous elections?
Yeah, I think Frank's prefaced the answer, but it's not completely zero. When there's deep uncertainty overseas, it does affect the American public mood, right? And when you have multiple things going on at the same time in Ukraine, in Israel, Gaza, and whatever's happening with China on any given day, that even adds to that sense of out of controlness, and then that America can't get control over it. Yeah, it raises people's anxieties, right? And it feels out of control. And that works against whoever the incumbent is, right? Because the incumbent's dealing with an ambiguous, hard to tackle set of issues, and there is no straight path through it, right? And the challenger can be much more clear-cut about it. Oh, make Europe pay for Ukraine so we don't have to, I'll just go give them a stern talking to and fix the problem, right? The challengers can say that because they don't own it, right? And they're not in the middle of it. So I would say it does matter because it's another headwind that whoever the incumbent was going to face in this situation. The incumbent party, being Harris's party, is sort of owning that sense of unease. And then the other factor in it is that an American trait when things are going to hell overseas, is they can get even more focused on, we need to fix things here at home, and that focuses even more attention on this issue of prices and affordability and how am I getting by and why are we all paying, why are they all paying so much attention to the well-being of other people around the world, and then that just compounds that other headwind that the incumbent party was going to face in this space. So the second part of your question is, for most Americans, it's just a very general story like that. There are populations who care deeply about those foreign policy situations. In a super, super close election, there is a lot of focus on whether those small populations will be mobilized or change their minds over it. That's a really hard one to get to. I don't know if your reporting has seen anything on that.
Yeah, so very briefly on the sort of everything feeling out of control, this was when Biden was still the nominee at the top of the ticket, but a Biden ally, someone in his administration told me, like, when things feel out of control, also voters want like a strong man. Like they just gravitate towards strength, which would benefit Trump. But for the populations, I have a colleague on the White House team, Yasmin, who has spent a ton of time in Michigan, and her view is that those communities who could be decisive in an election that will be decided, in 3 states by 40,000 votes spread across them, that it is a problem for Harris. She is not doing as bad with Arab Americans as Biden was. They give her a little more credit, but she still is not doing it necessarily as well as she needs to be doing for a race that could be that close. And it's interesting, when we sort of started talking about the blue wall, the conventional wisdom, but based on some reporting, was that like Pennsylvania was going to be her toughest state, right? And she had to choose Josh Shapiro. And then about two and a half weeks ago, I started hearing her toughest state in the blue wall will be Michigan, and in part driven by those concerns over what's happening in Gaza, although just recently there's now some thought it might be Wisconsin. But I do think the short answer is I do think that particular issue matters in certain states in an election that will be so close.
And the votes that really matter now, the four, we talked about young women. That's her advantage. That's her ace in the hole. For Donald Trump, he's getting a higher percentage of young African-American men than any Republican has. And the question is it going to fall back to the upper teens, or is it going to go to the upper 20s? Because that matters in Georgia and North Carolina. Second are Latinos, and that's probably the biggest group that's up. The Republican presidential candidate normally gets just over a third of that vote. Trump is getting a little over 40% of that vote, and she's in the mid-50s, which has never happened before. And that impacts Arizona and Nevada. And then the third group are organized labor, union members. If you're a government union, you're totally Democratic, both the leadership and the rank and file. Same thing with the teachers' unions. Among those who work with their hands, which normally is, and that is the blue collar, those are the paycheck to paycheck people. You work with your hands. It's why the Teamsters did not endorse. It's why some other unions have been really frightened, because the leadership is solidly Democrat and the membership is a majority Republican. If you take up the teachers' unions and government unions, Trump could actually win a plurality of organized labor, which has never happened before, and that's Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. There's a lot of... I don't believe the number. I just don't believe that he's doing as well as some people think he is, and I believe that the early voting is not an indication, simply Republicans wanting to get rid of this administration, just as Democrats voted early in 2020. That said, people who don't look Republican are voting for Trump. I've not seen that before.
Okay.
You can all hang yourself now.
There's a few more things I wanted to get through, but I do want to open it up for questions. I'm sure we have lots. Yeah.
Hi, Zach Heck. Thanks for being here. My question's a little broader, but I think relevant for the election. So in my lifetime, no recessions have started on the watches of Democratic presidents. And it's been over 100 years since a Republican president has not started a recession, or a recession hasn't started under a Republican. Yet the American people trust the Republicans election after election more on the economy. So why is that? And what can Democrats do to better sell themselves on their economy?
Fix education and people will know the truth. I mean, this is literally, if we want to address this, we got two things that are right out front and center. and number one is education. If we continue to allow young people to graduate and they don't know who the vice president is, they don't know who the 2 senators are, they don't realize the difference between the Declaration and the Constitution, they don't appreciate the Bill of Rights. If we let them graduate without knowing civics, then it's our own fault that our country's going to hell. If you want people to know the facts behind this, teach them economics. But we don't, or we teach it, but they don't learn it. And learning is what's important. Second is social media. And I don't know where this organization stands on this. I know you cannot regulate it because you cannot regulate free speech, and I get that, and that's probably the right course. But you can keep 13-year-olds off it, you can keep 14-year-olds off it, get it to the point where at least they're adult enough that they can process fact from fiction, that they can differentiate. Until we make that decision, and the last thing I'd say to the moms out there, because dads aren't going to do this, to the moms, take the phone away from your kids. Get them off social media, and if you choose not to do this, because you don't want to have the crap of them yelling at you, I hate you, then don't be surprised if you raise a kid that's actually addicted to this crap.
Hi, Chloe Domorowski. Trump made a play in the crypto space by announcing his investment there. I'm curious how you think this plays with the younger male voter, which we haven't talked about quite so much, and whether these sorts of niche plays into key areas really matter. Thank you.
You know, we just did a project on crypto, both sort of whether people say they've invested in it and how they've done, if they have, which is more not so good than good, or or less well than they thought they would, I guess is the better way to put it. But one crosstab we did have in there is it correlated with the political sphere? And the answer was no. You know, there wasn't a correlation between crypto and preference or partisanship, despite that really strong correlation with, with young men, which is really overwhelming. So, yeah, I had been told by a lot of people that crypto was the hidden factor in this election, and that Trump was going to win 90% of the crypto vote, and that was really what all the reporters in D.C. were missing. But I've not seen evidence of that.
I will say one thing that's it's sort of on a non-reported gut level. It feels like, oh yeah, young men, crypto. But for A, I trust what he said. but B, what's interesting is if Trump did that not because he was making a play for young men, he did that. And this is also just a helpful way of understanding Trump. He did that because he had been very opposed to cryptocurrency, right? Like he had said, it's like air, and it's not, it's hurting the dollar, all these things. And then a group of Bitcoin mining executives went down to Mar-a-Lago for a private meeting. And several hours later, he announced a changed stance on crypto. So, there was no, it may help with young men, it may not, but there was no political strategy. It is the way to understand Trump, which can be confusing, is that he is almost entirely purely transactional, right? And he's a salesman, and he is trying to win over whoever is in front of him. He is trying to win like the hour, the minute, the day. And when Trump was elected, I worked for the New York Times, I had covered Trump, and they had myself and a few of the other reporters who had covered him come down and do a brown bag for sort of like the whole DC bureau. And, all of these editors for the first year or two, and this is not unique to the New York Times, it happened everywhere, but would ask, well, Trump did this, which makes no sense. Is it like Schumer or McConnell? He's playing four-dimensional chess. And the answer is no, almost never, right? Like he's just trying to win you over, which is why he will say he will have dreamers in the Oval Office, and he will say you are the best among us, right? You're valedictorians. Of course you deserve to stay. And then I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but he'll have sheriffs in the Oval Office, and he'll be like, you know what? There's some dreamers. We could deport them, because he is just trying to win over whoever is directly in front of him. And in certain moments, there's a public outcry because people realize he's said two wildly contradictory things, right? That he's so proud of overturning Roe, and also that he is going to, support the Florida amendment that increases the ability to get an abortion later term. And there's an outcry, and whenever there is an outcry, he does almost always retreat to where his far right base is. But the strategy is much more transactional.
But it's easy to get away with it, and I think Paul Simon wrote the best words. It was in The Boxer. A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And that is what's been happening over not just the last few months, but the last few years. And so Trump can serve food at a McDonald's, which was brilliant, although I did note that E. coli came right after. Only Trump would have this happen. But if he'd been smarter, he would have gone to a Chick-fil-A. Just something for you to ponder. He does that at the same moment that he's saying they go on strike, fire them. That's his initial inclination, is to fire the people who he needs to vote for him. But then he goes and serves at a McDonald's. Those are very same people. That's your hypocrisy.
Hi, my name is Hall, a Chick-fil-A fan since like '99. I'm going to ask a fun one here, immigration. I'm an immigrant from Canada, so I feel like I can ask this. To what extent have historic Democratic constituencies have become more restrictive feeling against immigration? And why is that so? And can you possibly frame how big of a fix or small a fix that has put Kamala Harris in?
I never heard this before until this year, that I would have thought that the Democratic Party would have embraced immigration. Gives them more voters, tends to give them more voters. That it's more people who are economically challenged. In my focus groups this year, the Democrats were saying, they're taking my jobs, they're taking our jobs, they're getting our benefits. We don't have enough money to help us in those difficult times, and now more money goes to them. You have hotels that are completely filled with people who came across the border. You have hospitals that are jammed up. And I'm hearing as many Democrats saying, this is not America and this is not fair. I never heard that before until this election cycle.
And that was also sort of to Frank's point, the counterintuitive point of you watched that debate and you thought, talking about eating your neighbor's cats and dogs was not a winning message. But from Republicans and Democrats, I heard that they thought why there was not a bigger bump after the debate was because, again, that Trump had focused it on immigration, maybe not quite the way his campaign would have chosen, but he had focused on a sense that transcends political party and is not necessarily even fair, but that your community is changing, right? That it looks different, that it feels different, that you mentioned hospitals being jammed up in Springfield, Ohio. There's reports that you can't, not reports of people eating cats and dogs, but there's reports that you can now, there's a long wait to go to your doctor, where you used to just be able to call and get an appointment, that now you have to line up several hours before. And that is a very visceral thing that you hear from voters of both parties.
Yeah, and I would only add on the even migrant populations, it's more divided, but we always want to caution, there is no Hispanic voter or Asian American voter. When people came to America, why they came, how they came, what their economic circumstances. I mean, there's so much diversity in these populations, and a lot of the trends, even the Hispanic support for Republicans, that's a long-term trend over decades of generational change and changing migration patterns. I mean, some of these things move faster and slower in any given 4-year cycle, but there's a stereotype or a caricature or even an expectation, I think, among many Democrats that we can count on this cohort of this segment of the population to vote at least 80% for us. That was a bad sort of assumption to be making for a lot of decades now, and if they're still making it, they shouldn't be.
And, Donald Trump harnessing, going back to what you're saying, Ashley, that your beautiful towns are changing, right? Mm-hmm. That something that's in, Springfield being indicative of something that's happening across the country, regardless of if you're in a blue city, red town, red city, whatever. It's harnessing that feeling that people are experiencing, right? Mm-hmm.
Hi, Lauren Rackison, Bloomberg Associates. In an attempt to look ahead, what does the Republican Party look like after Trump?
Don't look at me. J.D. Vance did really well in the debate, really well. And I've been pretty critical because he seemed to say things that were mean to people, that he did these characterizations. obviously Catwomen, but there's other things that he said that I thought was unnecessary. And I really feel like when I was a kid, when I was 18, 19, 20, making the decision where I would align with, the Republicans were kinder and gentler. It's Ronald Reagan's era. And the Democrats are the ones that yelled and shouted and were mean. And I thought J.D. Vance was problematic. And then I saw the debate. And I was shocked at how good he was at explaining his point of view. Whether you agree or disagree, there's a real substance there, that he was a better defender of Trump than Trump was. Mm-hmm. And that Walz, who was supposed to be this great communicator, this happy-go-lucky guy, was really out of his element in that situation. In that one moment, Vance is now the heir apparent. Doesn't mean that you won't have a Nikki Haley again and other Republicans from across the country. But in looking at these Senate races and these House races, there is a brutality. It's not just meat, it's brutal that's going on in the Republican primaries. A viciousness I've never seen before. And it's going to take at least one election cycle for that to get cleared out.
I think, I will say, it's a good question because I think newsrooms will assign beat reporters to cover just that, what does happen to the Republican Party post-Trump. I think the Vance we saw in that debate was, I don't want to quite say compassionate conservatism, but it kind of was more of that, right? And Vance has done other sides. So my view is also that what happens to the future of the Republican Party is in some ways contingent, and it'll be a battle no matter what, but in some ways contingent on what happens in this election. And if Trump wins, and if there's a clear sense of the grievance and anger, and someone wants to continue that on as an heir apparent. And again, a cautionary tale is only Trump can be Trump, right? Like when J.D. Vance has done Trump stuff, like it was very off-putting for you. J.D. Vance on that debate was sort of the J.D. Vance of hillbilly elegy. And so again, I do think it depends on if Trump wins or not, and if he loses, Ron DeSantis can't be Donald Trump, right? There may be more of a move to the different versions, like the J.D. Vance version of the Trump light and the Nikki Haley version. And if he wins, you could see like the Don Jr. version of Donald Trump.
God help us.
Let's go to the back.
Hi, Krista Achenbach. Thank you for this. I have hopefully what are two straightforward aspects of a question. Given the way in which fear has effectively been monetized in media, where is polling on things like campaign finance reform, considering that we're seeing some pretty impressive numbers on fundraising? And then one of the debates and rumors kind of within this town is the role that Silicon Valley is playing, and so how does polling show up in terms of where Silicon Valley is going for the candidates?
I could take the reform one. You know, the public's take right now is one of pretty broad despair about the state of democracy. You know, Frank opened with that, I think. And there's a lot of skepticism that we're capable of meaningful reform of that. And I think that skepticism comes from two places. One, this sense that the partisan gap is so big that would never be able to find, a way to get past meaningful reforms. And the other is, I think, and there's been some conversation about this recently, Americans don't really see the mechanisms for meaningful change. So like campaign finance reform, that's going to require a constitutional amendment. Well, okay, then just give up. It's like, wait a minute. This country's amended its constitution a lot of times. And when you poll on it, you find majorities of Republicans and Democrats like the idea, and you find a lot of politicians who say they would support it. The question is, could the public really push something like that through in a meaningful way? But any reforms, whether, agree with them or disagree with them, like around finance, around, electoral college reforms, around, the structure of primaries even, the people know these things are problematic. They know they're contributing to what's ultimately a toxic and dysfunctional electoral structure. Right now, they feel impossible to people even as they support them.
72% of Americans, almost 3 out of 4, are mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. Back in 1992, very few of you are old enough to know where that comes from. Mm-hmm. in 1992 is 46%, and I thought, oh my God, half of Americans are mad as hell. And now it's 3 out of 4. How much worse can it get? The second one, which is even more frightening, is that 31% of Americans, less than a third, believe that their country is invested in them. And that is horrific. How much money does this country spend on education, roads, bridges, highways, Social Security, Medicare, all the things that this country does for us, and we think that the country doesn't matter, doesn't care about our success. And the third one is that more than 4 out of 5 believe this is the most divided we've ever been. All the money that goes into politics goes to push those opinions. That's why I had to get out of politics. Every ad that they put out now is a negative ad. Every ad's an attack ad, and there's no semblance of proper behavior. It's just slam the person until they can't get up again. I was with my students over the last few days, and they're watching this, and I'm showing them black and white, because that's meant to cause fear. Grainy, because it's meant to create doubt. The words in the bottom of the screen, horrendous, evil, destruction, all the most negative words you can possibly have. Manipulation, underlined, italicized. Every possible way to create these ugly perceptions, and half of those people are going to win in the end. I'd love it if they could get control of money, because all it does is it makes our situation even worse. But the Supreme Court won't let it happen, and I don't know how to get around that.
Constitutional amendment. See, he says it's impossible.
You think 38 states are going to pass it?
There are majorities in 50 that want it, so.
Good luck.
I know.
Let me know how it works out for you.
No. So why, why is it impossible? Is it just that the political machine won't let it happen?
All the people who've got the money want to continue
Right,
to spend
exactly.
the money, so they're going to spend money
Right.
against these reforms.
Yep.
Do you guys, I know there was a second part of the question
Oh.
about Silicon Valley and their role
Yeah, I
in
don't
this
have-
election, and, I mean, we could just start with Elon Musk, but do you guys have anything you want to add on that front as well?
I don't really know.
All the way in the back.
Thank you. Hi there, Kelly Shrubko. Thank you so much. So gender's come up a few times in the conversation tonight, and I was wondering, for the historians in the room, and including among you, maybe even polling, how workers basically got constructed to being men, and how the Democrats have not been able to reclaim workers, because it strikes me that a worker is a mom, maybe who's married, maybe is a single mom, and has to go to work, and then has the second shift. And then if she has a pregnancy she did not plan, maybe has to cross state lines to get reproductive care. And so I'm kind of wondering about the claiming of workers and partisan alignment, and how, like you said, Trump could get a plurality of working folks when that may not be the party that is most likely to represent their interests well. Thank you.
I want to walk right into this. Because at this point, I don't care anymore. I got sick back in 2020. It happened again early this year, so I didn't die. So I don't think I'm going to die here. Whenever there's a conversation about the gender gap, it's always a focus on women. Why are women voting this way? Why do women not like X, or why do women endorse this? I'd say probably the stories when the focus gender gap is 2-to-1 female over male. So I just did a focus group of that gender gap from the male perspective. Men who had voted for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and are now voting for Donald Trump. And they're not voting for Trump. They're voting, and they're not voting against Harris. They're voting against the perception that they see that the Democrats have changed. And they use the Harris campaign as an example. Look at her ads. What do you see in them? Very excited, professional, driven women who are looking forward to taking control. Where are the men? And the men see this. The Harris campaign, when she surrounds herself with really successful women. The best speech, the two best speeches I thought at the Democratic Convention, I was there, was Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey. Brilliant and incredibly well delivered, articulate, powerful. Where are the men? So what's happened now is that men feel ignored, they feel forgotten, and frankly, they feel betrayed. And so to win them back, which Harris has to do some of this, she has to find a way to speak to them, but she's not doing it because she's focused on younger women. The gender gap is two sides of the same coin. And she's chosen the female side, which I get. He's chosen the male side, which I get. Because he's not going to appeal to most women. And that's why we're at a 50-50 standstill. And the gender gap is biggest among younger voters. The older that you get, the more that the genders, I'm sure you show this in your polling, the more that the genders come together. So the gap is not that big among men and women 60 years of age or older. But among 18 to 29-year-olds, it's a chasm.
Do you want to add anything?
That's smart, by the way.
Well, I think we have to leave it there. Thank you guys so much for your insights.